Hi everybody, and welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude. And today we will continue on with part 5 of the Persson tribute build, the Airfix 1/48 scale North American P51D Mustang. So, a quick recap on where we left off. We left off with step 22. Everything's assembled. It needs to be assembled in sub-assemblies so I could do all the painting, and got all that done. So with that in mind, I'd like to apologize for the weird last few videos, the way they were edited. It was not supposed to be 3 separate videos. It was supposed to be 1, but I didn't pay attention to the time that it was taking, and it took about an hour and 40 minutes for the video, and that was way too long. So I had to chop it up into pieces. I tried to chop it in pieces that made the most sense, but you know, the intro on some of them wasn't very good because of that. So I apologize for all that, and I will be more cognizant of paying attention to the amount of time that it's taken me to do the video, so I won't have to do that again. So with that in mind, let's get cracking on the next steps. Okay, so we're up to this part here, which means I can install and put the cockpit in between the fuselage halves. Now, you will notice here that I had these glued on. If you watched the whole video last time, I had both of these glued on where the tail wheel assembly goes, but I forgot to put the tail wheel assembly in. So fortunately, I was able to use the cement and soften it up a little bit and get it removed so I can put this in place. So let me re-clean this back up here. Fortunately, I didn't do a very good job cleaning this part up, so it wasn't glued that great because of the paint, but we're good. So what I need to do is this, because the way this fits is this pin fits in this hole here, and then there is a pin on the either side of this that fits here. So I got to make sure that all gets in the right place. And let's see here, make sure I get it going the right direction. Only fit one direction actually, so that goes there and there, and then the pin goes in that there. So let's hope I can get that without too much hassle. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Now I'll have to weather this up, but that'll be easy enough, and I'll probably do that a little bit later in the build. I mean, even after I get the fuselage all assembled. Also, if you'll notice, I've got a blue background here. I'm hoping that will make it a little easier to see what's going on. I did it in a previous video, and I just forgot to do it on this one as well. So hopefully it will make it a little easier to see. So if you would, I'd appreciate it if you put in the comments below if you think that it helps with visibility or not. I would appreciate it. I know I've seen some videos where people have used solid backgrounds, blue being one of them, and it seems to work really well, especially when you're doing certain colors. So any input would be appreciated. So we got that in place, so we're good to go there. So next we can put the this whole assembly in here. So let's do a test fit here, and I'm using this back here to line it up because that's a positive point with that ridge right there. So now this is a really snug fit. So depending on how thick your paint is, you might want to do some trimming on that, or shaving some paint layers off, because this is a pretty tight fit. Let's see, let's put this together here. Okay, that all looks pretty good. That'll all close up nicely with minimal cleanup. That is really tight. And it looks like this. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. That looks good. That looks good there and there. Nice, nice fit stuff going on there and there. So here's something to take note of. A lot of times, not so much anymore, but in some older kits, when you get things put together, sometimes the panel lines don't quite match up, and that can be a real pain. So, yep, that looks really good. Now, if I do this right, I shouldn't have too much to do as far as cleanup, and I'll show you how I do that as I put it together. Okay, so we'll start gluing this up, and I'll show you how I do it. Let me get out some clamps here, which are very helpful. Now, one thing, this is my favorite method for doing fuselages, or as people who like to say it right say fuselage. So what I like to do is I like to do it in segments. That way everything goes together. Now I'm going to check this out here, because that seems like quite a gap. So let me look at something here real quick. Okay, so here's what I did off camera. It was a really tight fit, and it looked pretty good, except for down here on the bottom right there. So what I did, and was I made sure the paint was scraped off there and there, and then to make sure it squeezed together good enough, I had a bit of a step right here, so I scraped that down a little bit. Then I also scraped the paint off of this part here, this part here, to make sure that it fit together good. So that is what I did, and so with that I can now glue the cockpit into place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this part into place first, and make sure that this part here is out where it needs to be, because once I glue all this together, that'll push that in, right, this part right back here. All right, so what I'm going to do before I get that all jammed in there is I'm going to use this cement along this seam right here. You know, before I get this all glued together, I need to make sure this paint is scraped off here, because I want a really good joint all along the edges. So I'll make sure that's nice and clean. Okay, so we'll get this part glued there. Make sure that's bottomed out. And then right here I'd scraped off some cement there. So right here, put a nice bead right along that. I'm going to hold that there for a second. Make sure it sticks good. Now that was not sticking as good because it's slower drying, but once I put both halves together, it'll help hold all that in place. Okay, so we'll take this. I'm going to do the same thing here. Glue that right there. And get that lined up. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this after I get this part here. I'm going to clamp this before I go any further. So I'm going to glue that right there. Make sure it's all lined up. And then I'm going to use one of my clamps. Just make sure that is clamped there. And there. Okay, and I'm going to let that sit up for a few minutes. Okay, so that's set up. So the next thing I want to do, I went ahead and cut the top of this off and did a test fit, and it looks good. I'll have to do a little bit of work on this side, but I'll talk about that once we get over there. It's no big deal. So next thing I'm going to do is whenever I glue a fuselage together, I don't like doing the whole thing and then clamping it all. I like to do it in sections. So like this will be next. And then once I do that, then I'll move on to the back. Then I'll move on up here and then up here. That way I can use my clamps to kind of tweak things if I need to. Like if this side was high, I could put a little bit of pressure that would smash this down in a little bit, stuff like that, just to make it a little bit easier. So this will be the next part right here. And again, I'll use my Tamiya extra thin. And start back here like that. And by doing it this way, I can squeeze it together good, and then hopefully I can clean it up just by sanding and clean it up just by sanding that seam without having to actually use any filler. That's another one of the nice things about this glue, if you've never used it before, or cement I should say, is it dissolves, and when you squeeze the parts together, it'll squeeze a little bit of the plastic out, which kind of acts as its own self-filler, and you can sand that off. Okay, so this part is dried. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to go around the rest of the way doing the same exact thing, doing one portion at a time and working my way around so everything lines up good. I'm not going to do it on camera because I don't want it to get too stinking long. If I run into anything that's kind of weird or looks like it needs to be talked about, I will do so. But until then, I'll go ahead and work on this and come back. Okay, so the fuselage is now all together and looking dandy. There is going to have to be some a little bit of sanding, it looks like. So I'll do that a little bit. Looks like the spine is pretty good. So let's that's pretty good, but it is going to need some work because now I'll be able to tell a whole lot better once I get primer on here. The front end looks good. The back here looks pretty good. Now, there's one weird thing about this aircraft, and I don't even know if I'm going to attempt to fix it, but the seam is right here. Yet there is something weird going on there. Maybe that's just a seam. I don't know. It looked like an additional panel line or something, but that wouldn't make sense. So that's going to take a little bit of work, and then once I get through that, then I can do some panel line repair. But overall, it went together pretty good. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this stuff down before I attach these tailpiece here. Or before I attach the tailpiece and the front cowl. Okay, so I got got that sanded down the way I wanted it, and then using this, can't remember the brand, but using this to replace the panel line that was sawed off of there. And then once I get it to where I want it, I'll run just a very light amount of to me extra thin on there, just to kind of smooth it out like that. Okay, so that part's done. This part up here is done. Now to finish it, after I get it where I want, I use this sponge type sander. To really smooth it out. So I'm going to continue on with the bottom here. Okay, so I've got all the seams sanded down. So the next thing I need to do is I need to install these tail parts. Now you're probably looking at it and saying, haha, what a dope, because I glued all this together before I put that in there. So I'm going to take it apart and see if it can be done like this, because the instructions actually call out that you install them on each side before you assemble the halves together of the fuselage. But if you'll remember in my earlier episode, I monkeyed around with that and I figured this way would be best, but we'll see if I was right or not. And I think I might, oh yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, I can put them in from the side like that. So if you goof up, you can do it like this. Yeah, so I'm good. So what I'll need to do, now I could also just make it real easy on myself. I could just cut those two front tabs off and put them in that way. But I think I'll be okay like this. Yeah, because see, that fits in there really good like that. So what I think I will do is I will do these parts here first, here and here. Make sure it's all pushed together. Then, as you can see, there's like a little bit of a gap there. Then I can run some cement in there and glue that down. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I think that's the best course of action. And then I can squeeze this all together back here. So yeah, I'm stoked. It's going to work out nicely. So I'll begin by putting a little bit of cement there. Let it just wick into the seam like that. And then just push it into place. See, that looks pretty good. I like it. Now that little joint there will be covered up by the horizontal stabilizer. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry for a little bit because I don't want that to pull apart, and then I'll move on to this side here, which I can do the same way. Okay, well that's drying. I'm going to talk a little bit about this next little part here. So I got to glue this part on, and a thing to watch for is there's a raised seam right here and here, all the way around, that's keeping this from sitting. Now you don't want it like totally flush because there's a natural seam line, or a panel line there. Like that side there, that's fine. This side here in the front isn't quite as good. So what I'm going to do is just very carefully scrape. It's kind of too small to see on the video, but there was like some little rigidy bump action going on there that just ain't gonna cut it. Then once I get it on there, I can sand this all flush for a little bit of flash right there. But that part really fits on there really nicely, and it's nice because there's a stop right there that keeps you from pushing it too far back. So just a matter of lining it up and putting some cement on there, and Jolly Joe, there you go. So let's see, while I've got this here, I will go ahead and cement this side. Push that into place, whoops, like that, and hold it for a minute. Okay, and there's what it looks like, and I like the fact, the way I glued it, it made it not quite such a harsh seam line or a panel line. Made it looks more like a fared over piece, which, you know, kind of matches what's going on up here. So while that's curing completely, I need to knock this down a little bit because this is sitting, you probably can't tell, well you can probably tell from above, but you can, it's sticking out a bit on that side, not quite as much on this side. So I need to kind of sand that a little more flush. Now there is a seam line or a panel line there, but I do need to sand it down and make it look a little bit neater. And there we have it. The tail is on. So the next part I need to do is this here. That should be pretty easy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it in place, make sure it's lined up, then apply the cement from the inside so as not to mar the finish. The plastic on the outside. Make sure it's lined up properly, like that. And apply the cement from back here. Oh man. Like that. Okay, so that is all the way up to step 25. So I'm going to call it quits right here because I don't want this video to get too long. But there we are so far. So next time we come back, I'll start on step 26. And next time I'm going to have to start thinking about filling in the panel lines and stuff on the wings. So thanks for watching Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and the Peter Persson tribute build of the Airfix 148 scale P51D. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, any of that kind of stuff, please leave them in the comments section below and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. So until next time, I will see you all later.